Good afternoon. I'm Dave Weisberger, CEO of CoinRoutes.
And I'm Ian Weisberger, CTO of CoinRoutes, and welcome to our first installment of Bayside Chats.
So today we're going to talk about the ongoing saga of FTX. This week the indictment was unsealed against Sam, and I want to start with the reaction, because Ian, I know you have a pretty interesting one to this, to the most absurd headline, the one that said that Sam's arrest ends the dream of effective altruism and all of his attempts to improve the world.
Well, my thought on this is that actually if you want to make an impact in the world, you invest in businesses that are actually going to create things. Like if you look at the pharmaceutical industry and others, drugs and life-saving treatments have been created by companies typically. So I don't necessarily agree with him there. But I mean, ultimately the proof is in the pudding with what happened there. And I think it's important to note his actions and not his words leading up to the eventual, the past downfall.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think he was a con artist. There have been people saying in his defense literally is the I know nothing defense. Like I'm a bumbling idiot and I was just kind of sitting here. But his actions were very clear. A coordinated attempt to make FTX look bigger than it was and better than it was by bribing donating to politicians, by donating to causes that would maximize the appearance of generosity, while actually the fine print was things were stretched out over long periods of time.
You know, one of the things that I've heard in terms of what actually happened was that basically Alameda was a trading company, and trading companies maybe only get 1 or 2 or 3 times revenue in terms of multipliers. But what they realized was if they hooked up the trading company to a tech exchange company, they could then go and get 30 or 40 times revenue. And I think that actually makes a lot of sense. So, you know, I don't actually think Alameda was really making money even for the last several years. Maybe, yes, they made money in 2017 with the huge arbitrages that were there. But I think when that kind of ended, they really needed to come up with the next thing. And that's how FTX kind of came about, right?
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that that's true. The really funny in the macabre sort of way, is why the hell didn't he realize that and let Alameda shut down? Why would he let them taking those big bets? I mean, obviously ego played a hell of a bigger role in this than most people are willing to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's partially true, but ultimately what happened, and again, actions speak louder than words. I mean, looking at some of the testimony, it's insane. I mean, how does someone go from being the wonderkin next J.P. Morgan, last month to I don't know anything, I don't know what happened to $8 billion, a few weeks ago? Like that just really doesn't make any sense to me. And I think that's, a lot of people not in the crypto industry seem to say, oh, well, that's just crypto and that's just how crypto is. But I don't think it is. I think he was just, a scammer. And unfortunately, he kind of gave crypto a bad name, right?
I mean, it points out something else that I've often thought. My gut tells me, as horrible as the event is, and let's be clear. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, but my thought is that somewhere between 50 and 75% of the professional crypto industry was crippled by this, certainly harmed by this in serious ways because of how dominant FTX was within the top tier of professionals in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's really unfortunate. I knew a lot of traders then that were able to try to get their money off and whatnot. Unfortunately, a lot of firms just said, well, this is Sam, like this can't possibly be true, and just refused to believe it until it was too late. And so it's just really unfortunate that's kind of what happened. My hope is that people on a go-forward basis learn their lesson and learn that they probably shouldn't have a single counterparty for their fund. I don't really understand how it's possible that you have a fund that's taking customer deposits and you have a single counterparty in crypto. I mean, you wouldn't do it even in equities or other asset classes. You want to cap your exposure. You have deposits insured up to whatever amount at each venue, at each custodian. You have multiple custodians. Like it makes zero sense to me that people were doing this. And so, I mean, from a selfish perspective, maybe in the long term it'll be good for businesses like CoinRoutes and others that allow people to trade across multiple exchanges. But also that's the way that the industry needs to go anyway. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of short-term pain, but ultimately in the long run, hopefully we can get past this and move on to a better kind of crypto trading ecosystem.
So before I make the point, because I agree with everything you just said, I do want to thank you, although I will point out that I'm one of those idiots, although I only have 3 Ether and some dog end stuff on FTX US. Ian told me I should get it the hell off, and I was one of those people saying, oh, come on, it can't be that bad. Well, I was wrong.
Yeah.
So I got fooled. It's weird, though, that how many people who got fooled still refuse to admit it. Kevin O'Leary being the latest dumbass. He has now declared himself for the world to be a dumbass. I don't care. They can call him Mr. Wonderful. I call him Mr. Dumbass, because the fact is he still says he would invest with Sam if it turns out that it was just malfeasance. So you're willing to invest with the village idiot who's willing to allow billions, I mean tens of billions of dollars of P&L going unknown.
Yeah.
How is someone like this considered an accredited investor who's allowed to invest on behalf of millions of other people, or has TV shows talking to people, giving advice to millions of people, yet we have rules that say that people who study and who understand and who work hard, if they're not rich, can't invest in products?
Yeah, I mean, I think the accredited investor angle is interesting, but I would also like to point out that there were several large VC funds that invested money into this thing without doing any due diligence. And, it's one thing for large institutional investors who have diversified portfolios to lose money in this thing. But I think it was really problematic because when Sequoia invests, hundreds of millions of dollars into an entity, and then all these other people follow on after them, a lot of times people just trust the lead to do the due diligence. And Sequoia, by doing that and investing all this money, signaled to the market that they had done due diligence when in fact they hadn't. And I think that that's really a huge issue. And that points out kind of larger structural issues that have existed and hopefully become rectified. But I mean, it's just insane. I mean, at CoinRoutes we have external accountants and we have a separation of duties and whatnot. And the fact that it was Sam and the head of engineering and one other guy that had access to the matching engine and that was it, and customer funds is insane at a company that big. I mean, if you're a fiduciary and you don't have a board and you have whatever it was, $15 billion in customer assets, that's insane. I mean, offshore, onshore, whatever, that's insane and should never have been allowed to happen. And the people that were investing and signaling to the market should not have allowed that to happen.
But the funny part about it is I made this statement earlier this week and actually got quite a bit of retweets and likes on Twitter, but I actually believe it to be true. I think we got lucky. The fact is what happens if FTX doesn't blow up this year and gets more and more power based upon all the political donations, gets bigger and bigger, and still has all these problems and blows up 2 or 3 years later when it could be 10x the size?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so, who knows, or worse, passed legislation that took DeFi and blocked it from happening so that there was, I mean, I know you feel very strongly about this. I mean, we think the future is separation of custody from exchanges and businesses like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the DC CPA would have been a disaster for the industry, and the way it was spun was problematic. And I think you're right. I think it is good that this all blew up before that came to pass, because it would have been a huge problem for anyone else trying to enter the market. I mean, we would have had a situation that would have looked a lot kind of similar to normal legacy financial ecosystems where you have single kind of custodians and exchanges that kind of have a monopoly and make it really hard for new entrants to enter the space. I think that would have led to something similar, and if anything worse, because it would have been like basically FTX would have been the only people allowed to do it. I mean, at least in equities, you have multiple exchanges and whatnot. It would have been pretty bad.
Right, and in crypto, the last thing I want to come back to is something that you said right in the beginning, which is so many people saying, oh, this is just crypto being crypto. I want to be clear. I know my opinion, I'm pretty sure you're going to agree, this was not crypto being crypto. This was theft. And the reason that it was enabled is because of lack of oversight. And the reason we have lack of oversight is because we have two agencies in the United States, one of which is committed to not working with the other, the SEC, and committed only to try to enforcement. And their enforcement are things like going after Kim Kardashian and going after tokens no one ever heard of. Meanwhile, the SEC was involved. They were involved. They actually fined and settled with BlockFi, which, by the way, had a relationship with FTX, which ultimately precipitated their final descent into Chapter 11. And the SEC has their hands all over that.
I'm going to take a little bit more hopeful attitude. I think that after this whole debacle, both the SEC and the CFTC are going to have to figure out a way to work together, because ultimately people are mad, and there's going to have to be regulation that moves the industry forward and allows it to operate, because at this point, the problem is too big to ignore. So yeah, maybe people will overreact, but ultimately at this point, you can't rule by enforcement anymore. There clearly have to be rules. We clearly are going to see some rules, and ultimately that might be good for the industry in the long term. I mean, it's hard to say what's going to happen, but at this point, it's too big of a problem to ignore. That said, people probably shouldn't be promoting, assets without saying that they own them and all that sort of thing. So,
oh, absolutely.
Fine. I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah. By the way, agreed, 100%. And certainly,
right. I mean,
I believe that this event will catalyze something to happen in the regulatory front. The hope is that the promise of digital assets, and there are many promises of digital assets in many respects, will win in the end. And it's good to know that there are some people who truly get it. I mean, there are, like Representative Tom Emmers, you read what he says, he totally gets it, and he happens to be sitting on the Finance Committee. So there is a chance, a reasonable chance, that we might be able to get towards something bipartisan that isn't crazy, that allows us to move forward as an industry. It's just when the first knee-jerk reactions are, oh, it's only crypto, we should regulate it out of existence, I mean, that's just not very helpful.
I mean, it's just a hard thing to do, right? Because if you have a company and you're a publicly traded company, you have all these rules and you have a board and you have auditing and you have accountants and you need to do those things in order to stay listed. But with like some of these crypto exchanges, the way that they were operating, like it was hard to pin down exactly what jurisdiction it was in, so it was hard to actually regulate them. And my point here is I think DeFi, because of its transparent nature, is actually going to be a solution to these problems where, if I log into a DeFi exchange on the blockchain, I can see what the collateralization is, how much assets there are. If, if someone runs away with the money and with the reserves of a decentralized exchange, derivatives or spot, like you're going to know, and it's going to be obvious. Whereas with FTX, it took CoinDesk publishing the story and Binance and the whole thing and how it unfolded. It took a long time to actually figure out what was happening, and we still don't really know what happened.
And it's pretty clear that they had lost billions,
right?
Many, many months before it all unraveled.
Which is insane. Because in the DeFi ecosystem, if that sort of thing happens, immediately, and there's transparency and there's accountability there. In an interesting way, there is accountability there. And so I'm seeing a lot of volumes for our clients migrate to decentralized exchanges like DYDX and stuff like that. And so I think that if anything, this is kind of a boon to the DeFi ecosystem, and that's why we're kind of making a big push into DeFi aggregation, because a lot of funds just simply aren't going to park their money with offshore exchanges anymore, until there are better options, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, the trend is certainly a friend to what we're trying to build. The short run is obviously horrendous with so many companies up in the air, so many people having to reestablish new funds or reseed or recapitalize or taking a step back to see what's going to happen. But the fact is, there's a simple set of trends. More decentralization, more custodial involvement with exchanges, more exchanges that actually don't have to be trusted, or if they do have to be trusted, with some form of regulation is likely to happen. And nobody looking at this saying, okay, I'm going to trust one exchange. I mean, we literally had dozens of potential clients tell us that FTX was the best UI and most capital efficient, so we're just going to use them. And if we're only going to use them, do we really need software? Yeah, you might make your algorithms might be okay, but they got some too, so we'll use that. That literally was our number one competitor, and they're gone. And by the way, not only are they gone, but I don't think anyone will ever trust a single exchange again.
Right. And I mean, that brings us kind of to a more mature ecosystem where there are multiple exchanges, there's multiple counterparties, there's multiple people providing credit and leverage and custody. And that's ultimately where this thing has to go to really be a mature asset class anyway. So,
Yep, I agree with that. So last topic, Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren came out this week with a bill that essentially says you cannot be a miner, a node operator, or anything on a public blockchain without that's moving financial assets without KYC AMLing, which of course, since miners don't know who's doing the transaction, by design with Bitcoin, would literally be the death of Bitcoin in the United States. It would literally force it all to move offshore. I mean, my reaction to this is, if you're going to be a totalitarian, at least tell people that you're a totalitarian, not a progressive. The reality is this is just the government controls everything, and it's yet another one of these proposals. And it's just unfortunate that we keep hearing this nonsense from this wing of the party. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. I think it just kind of reflects a general lack of understanding about how this works. And I find it a little bit disingenuous that people that are supposed to be progressives, that are, protecting investors, are actually voting for something that hurts, these small towns in Texas that have miners, and all these new industries that are popping up in upstate New York to do mining that were previously kind of had this industrial industry, and then after that there was nothing left, and now they're finding Bitcoin mining as kind of a path forward. And it's really kind of amazing to see what happened, back when China banned Bitcoin mining, how everyone thought it was going to be kind of the death of Bitcoin and network hash rate was going to be done. And we actually saw a lot of hash power actually migrate to America, right? And so now we have this whole new industry that's here. And it's kind of amazing to see how dynamic the crypto ecosystem is in terms of how that happened.
Oh yeah, that's certainly true, and that's one of the reasons. It seems pretty clear that even if she was successful, which is basically impossible because there's nowhere near the votes to try to destroy all public blockchains, which is really what she seems to want to do. It's really about financial control and repression more than anything else. It's, we are both in crypto, and both are big Bitcoiners for the reason that we see. Well, you express what your bit. My reason is financial freedom on a global scale. The fact is there are 2 billion people unbanked in this world, and I don't know how many people don't have a currency they can trust.
I mean, I think it's interesting. So if you look what happened with the evolution of kind of telecommunication networks, a lot of countries in Africa went straight from having absolutely no connectivity. Then they skipped landlines and went straight to cell phones. And I think what's going to happen, because 30% of the world doesn't have a stable currency, there's a huge percentage of the world that's unbanked, is we've already seen a lot of these people move straight to mobile crypto wallets, right? And so they don't need to go and trek hours to find the nearest bank branch and deal with that. They can just do it from their cell phone connected to a cellular network, and now they have money where they don't have to stash, whatever cash they have or gold or whatever they can find that has value, or barter, whatever. They can have a safe way to store and transact, right? And that's really important. That's really important in a lot of markets. And then even in some kind of formerly developed economies that are suffering with huge inflation right now, right? Those places now have a way to transact. And a lot of people think, oh, well, Bitcoin's so unstable, it's crazy, it's not a good store of value. And reasonable people could disagree whether or not, Bitcoin itself and Ether and any of these tokens are going to, hold their value and go up or down. But what's undeniable is that this blockchain technology and the stable coins built on top of them provide powerful financial primitives that allow anyone, anywhere to have savings in a safe way and to be able to transact globally or locally, for that matter, with low fees and without having, censorship and without having the bank saying, sorry, you don't have a high enough balance. It actually allows kind of everyone in the world to participate in finance, right, without having to trust each other, which is extremely important.
Right. And my problem, all of that is certainly true. And my belief actually is that Elizabeth Warren totally gets that. She understands it and doesn't care. In fact, worse than doesn't care, doesn't want people to be able to achieve financial independence, doesn't want people to be able to achieve economic freedom. There are plenty of poor people in the United States who suffer from problems not being able to get access to bank accounts or have to go use cash payday loans and that kind of stuff. Yeah. All of these people are the ones that could be helped. In fact, there is a reason, the data suggests this. There is a higher percentage of adoption of Bitcoin among poorer and minority communities than there are among rich communities. And Elizabeth Warren sees this and says, oh my God, no, we need them to be dependent on the government. That's what I want. And so that's why every time, literally when China banned Bitcoin, it was like, oh, it's going down, great. And she came up with more excuses. To me, that's really a problem. And there are lots of smart people that understand this should be bipartisan, and eventually maybe we'll get there. Unfortunately, the FTX situation has cast it as once again a partisan issue because he was claiming he was going to spend $1 billion to elect Democrats in the next cycle. I personally think he was playing both sides, and honestly, was just trying to amass power.
I think it's interesting. We touched on a few points there regarding, they don't want to lose power and financial control. And yes, we can look at Bitcoin as this global thing, and obviously it is. But if anything, having blockchain technology and stable coins is actually going to help export dollars to the rest of the world, which is actually something that we need right now, considering everything that's going on with, the China news in terms of pricing oil in yuan. I think that actually having a really robust crypto industry in America helps keep, the dollar strong because of all the stable coins. If you look at, and to explain that a little bit, 99% of value on blockchains in stablecoins is dollars. Everything is traded in, Tether, USDC, DAI, whatever, it doesn't matter. And so ultimately those things are something that looks like a dollar. And so it's still, the unit of account is still dollars, right? And so if anything, having the industry be robust here, allowing these stablecoins to exist in a reasonable and safe way allows the US to continue exporting dollars, and is actually good for America, right? And actually is good for industries that we have here, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to conclude. I think the reality is that a robust crypto industry with stable coins, Bitcoin, and smart contracts is good for American jobs and good for America. It's really important for the rest of the world. And that is the message that we care about the most. all this news, and there's lots of it. We've talked about a lot of stuff this week. All of this news boils down to a couple of simple things. We had a dude who was trying to run an entire market, and he was doing it in a dishonest way. He was stealing from his customers and using those funds to promote his own brand and to try to get on his side of it. And in a way, we got a little bit lucky that he got caught before he was able to actually do that. But in the short term, it's theft. And that theft has caused all of these good things that we were just talking about to take a back seat for a while as people start to reevaluate. And so that's how we're looking at it. And frankly, we're both believers, right?
Yeah.
So thank you guys for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.